All right. It's a pleasure to have former gubernatorial candidate and Representative Lee Zeldin, our good friend from New York. Lee Zeldin, the New York Post has done an exemplary job of covering this Venezuelan gang problem that has really taken root in New York, in the metropolitan area, but also around the country, Chicago, even little towns in Aurora, Colorado, and so forth. This is an international gang. This is a bloodthirsty, brutal, violent gang. It now has a foothold in our country, a foothold in our cities, and even in our towns. It wasn't even here, to the best of my knowledge, 5 years ago, 4 years ago. Open borders, no deportation. We're literally flying people into this country from Venezuela, putting them on the path to citizenship. This insanity that's going on at the same time we're attacking our cops and undermining their authority, do you think we're going to get out of this?
It's going to be up to voters November 5th, and you made an important observation of how quickly this happened. There were Democrat leaders in this country who were openly encouraging not just voter policies, but also a message to people who were not even living in the U.S. to come here. I mean, we heard it from Kathy Hochul. It was an issue during our gubernatorial race, December of 2021, encouraging people to come illegally into the United States. So Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, they come into office, they start implementing policies on day one, stopping construction of the border wall, ramping up catch and release, getting rid of Remain in Mexico, getting rid of Title 42, attacking Customs and Border Patrol. And you have these people coming illegally taking advantage of laws. So now they come in. They get rewards, goodies, incentives for coming in. They could go to places like New York City, which has both sanctuary city and sanctuary state protections. In New York City, they actually passed a law that would be giving these people the right to vote, to give hundreds of thousands of non-citizens the right to vote. They get free money, they get free housing, free education, free health care, and they take advantage of the laws that are on the books where the local law enforcement is not able to communicate, coordinate with ICE. And we're talking guns, drugs, sex trafficking. I mean, this is as bad as it gets, and it happens so quickly out of nowhere.
And the New York Post writes how New York City's sanctuary status allows bloodthirsty migrant gangs, this Venezuela gang, to thrive in Big Apple shelters. So they're brutalizing American citizens. They're brutalizing other migrants. They're taking control of these shelters. They're taking control of these neighborhoods. And it did happen so fast. And so I think to myself, Lee Zeldin, do you hear any Democrats talking about reversing course in any serious way, whether they're in New York City or Chicago or anywhere? Do you hear them talking about reversing course?
Not really. I mean, there was some politics that they were playing around what was a bad border bill that they were trying to get through.
Well, that border
Congress.
bill allowed 1.8 million illegal aliens in, and we're not even talking about gotaways, among other things. So that wouldn't have stopped anything.
Amen. But they were using, like we saw in New York 3, this congressional district where there was a special election in February. Tom Suozzi, who ended up winning, the Democrat in that race, was using rhetoric, was using messaging about getting stronger on the border. But where the rubber meets the road, as you just pointed out, if you look at the actual policy that they're pushing, this isn't policy that actually fixes it. Are you calling on places like Albany to start passing laws to protect law-abiding New Yorkers? Are you calling to get rid of sanctuary city and sanctuary state policies? How about prosecutors who refuse to prosecute, like Alvin Bragg? What about not supporting our men and women in law enforcement because they're being hung out to dry, unable to do their job, where they know that there's wrongdoing happening? And as you point out in this great New York Post story that just came out, law enforcement knows where the problem is, but they're unable to tackle it. It's wild.
And now we have situations. And, Donald Trump brings this up and he's attacked, but he's right. Many of these Venezuelan gangs and other gangs, they wind up in the inner city. They wind up not exclusively, but significantly in black communities. And so I just sit here and I think here's another great, again, New York Post article. And it's Chicago gangbangers rage against newly arrived Venezuelan migrants as this gang, the city is going to go up in flames. Now we have domestic gangs of American citizens who are facing off against these Venezuelan migrant gangs. Have you ever heard anything so crazy?
President Trump was talking about this at his rally last night in western Pennsylvania, in Indiana, Pennsylvania. And President Trump was tackling the challenge of MS-13 head-on successfully on Long Island. As you pointed out, that criminal activity was going on based in places like there's a place called Brentwood and Central Islip in Suffolk County, New York. Mm-hmm. It's heavily black and Hispanic population, and that's where the people are finding roots. And you end up with a school system that ends up getting eroded, low graduation rates, low attendance rates, high transiency rates, poor performing schools. I remember going to visit a school district there. I was in a sixth grade where every single classroom in that sixth grade had over 40 kids per class. So in order for a kid to go to the restroom, 3-4 other kids would have to stand up to let that kid go through. The consequences of the open border policies, in a way, is the least of it. When you add this criminal activity on top of it, they utilize a black market, and they are victimizing people who are innocent. The sex trafficking is some of the very worst stories I ever heard in life. And the recruitment is of junior high school kids. I mean, they're 13, 14 years old getting recruited off of the playground to join MS-13. President Trump tackled it head on. All sorts of people are getting locked up left and right. The whole challenge was getting reversed. It was amazing. But now it's like paling in comparison to the challenge that'll be in front of President Trump now after the Biden-Harris administration let this Venezuelan gang in.
It seems to me, Lee Zeldin, God forbid if the Democrats win the presidency and the vice presidency, and we have two extraordinarily radical individuals running for president and vice president, Harris and Walz, that this will be permanent. It might be permanent anyway because deportation isn't that simple. It gets complicated with all these judicial rulings and so forth, but I'm extraordinarily concerned that this country will never be the same again. It'll be dangerous. It'll be third world. You've got illegal immigrants, including these gang members, getting welfare benefits that many people in these communities are not getting. And I want to follow up with you on this when we return. I'm with Lee Zeldin, the Venezuelan gang problem in New York, Chicago, and the rest of the country, in the spectacular series of stories from the New York Post. We're here with our friend Lee Zeldin talking about the consequences of an open border. You know, Lee Zeldin, I can't think of a single positive consequence of an open border, from fentanyl, from the drug cartels making a fortune, from the sex trafficking. 320,000 minors are missing, and the Harris-Biden administration don't know where they are. The complete lack of assimilation into our culture, these gangs, the crime, the violence, and yet this goes on and on and on, and the media seem to cover for this. So let me ask you a question. You made the point, you're right, that really the only way to turn it around is this election, if it can be turned around. So I'm going to ask you what I get asked all the time. What is your sense of this election? What is your sense of the presidential election? How do you think this is going, or do you have no idea?
I'm in Wisconsin right now, today and tomorrow, doing 3 stops per day as part of the Trump Van's campaign bus tour. Yesterday, I was with President Trump in western Pennsylvania. I did a roundtable with the president.
I saw you there on the stage.
Yeah, we were first in Smithton, and we were focused on CCP influence over U.S. agriculture.
Communist China.
And then we were the Chinese Communist Party, and then we were in Indiana, Pennsylvania for President Trump's rally with more people waiting outside than we're able to get inside. The energy is amazing. The support is clearly there. What's wild to me is how there are low propensity voters, people who vote sometimes, not always, and no propensity voters, the people who could vote but they don't at all, who are looking at November 5th, Election Day, as a game day decision of whether or not they vote. 100% President Trump will go into this election with enough support to win. The question is whether or not everyone shows up to actually vote for him. The amount of people who are gun owners who don't vote, evangelicals who don't vote, veterans who don't vote, it's wild. Where I am in Wisconsin right now, there were many multiples of gun owners who did not vote in 2020, way beyond the margin of victory for Joe Biden in 2020. So you ask me, how am I feeling? There are many things that I would say that are better than 2020. However, I always campaign like I'm behind. And any poll that says we're up 2, let's just operate with the mentality that we're down 2. Everyone out there, your vote absolutely does count. If everyone has the mentality that they shouldn't vote, then you're guaranteeing that every race up and down the ballot goes the wrong way. And everything that we are discussing now, everything that you always discuss on air that needs to get tackled by this country, none of it's going to head in the right direction. So we need everyone participating, too big to rig. That's the only way to win this, and have that race called November 5th.
I think folks that you're talking about need to understand this isn't about politics. This is about whether we live in America in a lifestyle that we want, in a way that we want, or whether we lose our country to this radical ideology, and we lose our identity, and we lose our history and our culture and our economic system, because all of that is on the ballot, is it not?
It's all on the ballot, and what's so telling to me, President Trump wants to talk about his 4-year record when he was in office. Kamala Harris wants to make believe the last 3.5 years haven't happened. When she says her values haven't changed, we should believe her. When Bernie Sanders says that Kamala Harris is just being pragmatic to win an election, believe him. Kamala Harris has shown that she is somebody who is against fracking. She compares the ICE to the KKK. She was bailing out people, burning down Minneapolis. We have already been talking about the open border policies. The list goes on of where she's on the wrong side of these issues. Any type of flip-flop that shows up at 6 p.m. on a Friday evening by someone on her team trying to claim to some friendly reporter that suddenly she has the position that's polling better, I don't believe any of it. We wake up the day after the election. Harris and Walz are getting ready, starting in transition to take over. They are the furthest left major party nominee any of us can remember in our lifetimes, and there have been plenty of far-left nominees in the past. So it is all on the line. And what is so telling about what we were just discussing with the open border is the fact that they don't just have policies that allow these gang members to come in. They then enact policies that will give away tax dollars, that give free education, free healthcare, free money, and that list goes on. And then when they break laws and victimize Americans, including, as you just pointed out with the fentanyl, killing Americans, they cover for these people. As a matter of fact, in places like Washington, D.C. and New York City, and soon maybe coming to a blue city or state near you, they want to give them the right to vote.
Wouldn't you agree if we had at least a relatively honest media that was serious about presenting news rather than pseudo events, rather than partisan Democrat politics, that the country would be in such far better shape, that the American people would be so better informed, that the media have had a role in the deterioration of this society, have they not?
The media should just inform the public on facts and let the American public for themselves decide what they believe is best for them, their family, their state, their community, their country. The media can't do that, though, because the voters who are trying to make their minds up, and they still haven't yet, they're talking about their top issues. It's the economy. It's our border. It's safety on our streets. It's energy dominance and independence. It's a strong and effective foreign policy. President Trump was ending foreign wars, not starting new ones. It's about having a military that's not a woke social experiment, instead focused on being America's greatest fighting force. We have a situation on our hands where the media can't just shoot straight across the board with the public to allow the public to make an informed, educated judgment decision for themselves, because then it's a landslide that they'll lose because they're so invested. President Trump pointed out last night's rally, the media will probably benefit from higher ratings for it, but that's not how so many of these people in the media are thinking. There's a level of derangement beyond that that's very personal, and they fear the public thinking for themselves. They want the power to be able to tell people what they believe, how they should think, and how they vote.
We only have a few minutes left, Lee Zeldin. You served in the United States military. You were one of two, I think, Jewish members of the House of Representatives, not Republican members of the House of Representatives. What happens to the state of Israel and our alliance with Israel if Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are elected president and vice president of the United States?
There will be more daylight between the United States and Israel at best. At worst, Israel ceases to exist. I mean, you just look at what Kamala Harris is saying coming out of a meeting with Bibi, trying to put pressure on Israel to accept a ceasefire, even though Hamas is not at the table. Hamas didn't agree to a ceasefire. Hamas has pledged to wage jihad against Israel, wiping Israel away from the river to the sea. Hamas says that a Palestinian who negotiates with Israeli is not a real Palestinian. And you don't see Kamala Harris talking about it, instead putting pressure on Israel, especially for domestic politics, because she wants to win Michigan, and she's pandering to people who aren't even with her. You ask Tim Walz, what should the Harris-Walz administration do? What are you planning with regards to Israel and Gaza? Walz makes no mention of Hamas. Walz makes no mention of American hostages. They are telling us exactly where they are on this issue, and it's scary. It's far left, and it's pandering, and it doesn't add up to Jews being any safer, Jewish college students and faculty especially being protected from what they're encountering right now. Our streets aren't going to become any safer, and what we see from encampments to flag burning to vandalism and all sorts of buildings getting taken over and other crimes being committed, it's all going to go in the wrong direction. These are people who refuse to lead these cancerous elements within their ranks. Instead, they pander to the pro-Hamas sympathizers, and they're taking over the Democratic Party. They're not leading it.
Here we have a vice president running for president. She hasn't said a damn thing about Hezbollah in the last 72 hours. Nothing. She hasn't said a word of support for Israel. She hasn't said a thing. Not a thing. And I noticed, I talked about this earlier in the program, all these left-wingers who back her, all these Islamists, the mayor of Dearborn, Michigan, and those folks and so forth, they're all quiet, they're all happy. Tlaib has said horrific things. She's basically thrown in with Hezbollah. I mean, here we have an Islamist in the United States House of Representatives. She's not the only one. The media doesn't go up to Harris and say, do you condemn her? What about what she said? Harris is getting 100% free ride. And I just hope the American people are not bamboozled, that there's enough out there who say, I'm not going to vote for somebody who's hiding from me. I mean, what we know of her is horrendous. And yet she is running a campaign that is anti-democratic, that is anti anything that America has experienced in any presidential election. But I do want to end with this, Lee Zeldin. I think there should be a second debate. I think Kamala Harris should debate Kamala Harris, because the first Kamala Harris seems to be a little different than the second Kamala Harris. So she ought to debate herself, and we could all watch and try and figure out what the hell she's all about, even though you and I know. Lee Zeldin, thank you. Keep up the great work, my friend.
Thanks, Mark.
Take care of yourself. He's a good man.